Welcome to Dig Deep, the mining podcast. In this podcast, we go deep into mining news, hot topics, and live interviews with mining professionals and leading figures in the mining industry. Introducing your host, Rob Tyson, founder and director of Mining International and Mining International Executive, a leading global mining recruitment and headhunting agency.
Hi, mining community. Welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the mining podcast. And today's guest is Spencer Cole, who's the CDO and CFO of Xanadu Mines, a copper exploration company with projects in the South Gobi and Western Mongolia, and aims to develop porphyry and intrusion-related deposits. And they're also committed to Mongolia and its potential as one of the largest great copper frontiers. Spencer has qualifications in mechanical and materials engineering, a business and finance MBA, and also a CPA, and has worked in various industries, including mining, aerospace, and oil and gas across the Americas, Australia, and Southeast Asia. He's been with Xanadu for coming up to 5 years now, and he's going to give us an overview of the company, their flagship project, Kharmagtai, and will educate us more on the Lassonde Curve, and how that has impacted the company, plus much more. Before we start the podcast, I just want to give a shout out to our sponsors, Hawcroft, who are leaders in property risk management in the mining industry since 1992. They offer risk insurance surveys, construction risk reviews, and asset critical assessments, and more. Working across 600 sites globally, Hawcroft supports mining, processing, smelting, power, refinery, ports, and rail operations. So if you're looking for property or insurance risk management services, then visit their website at www.hawcroft.com. All the details are in the show notes. Well, Spencer, welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
Doing well. Thanks, Rob. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time. So as an active listener to the podcast, just wondering if you can just tell us a little bit about yourself, about your background, about your career. Obviously, I just covered a little bit in the introduction, but I just wonder if you can go into a little bit more detail. Just tell us about your career, how it's developed to where you are today.
No problem, Rob. Not wanting to go too far back in time, but I graduated with my engineering degrees from California, University of California, Davis, and Cal Poly, and was looking around and decided where should I go first, and at the time aerospace was a pretty hot item, and I thought this would be really interesting, and I made my way down to Los Angeles and worked for Northrop Grumman as a material and process engineer, project manager. Building satellites and laser systems and all the kind of stuff that I thought was cool when I was young. But after a few years of that work, I attended night school, completed an MBA at University of Southern California, and said, okay, well, it's time to take another assessment and say, what do we do next? Most USC grads, they stay in Southern California, use the incredibly strong university network there, but I had a bit of wanderlust. And that took me across industries and across the country to ExxonMobil Americas in Washington, D.C., and then in Houston, Texas, which had a wide range of roles. It's one of the benefits of working for one of these really big companies is they really look to develop you, and they look to give you experience all across the company. And ExxonMobil is one of those companies that thinks an engineer can do anything. Whether they've got a qualification for it or not. So as an engineer, you can get stuck into anything. And I worked in project management, business planning, but I worked across refining, fuels marketing, even a stint in IT in the chemicals company, and I loved it. But in the end, ExxonMobil's a company as big as some countries. And in the end, I decided I really wanted to have a more hands-on impact to the bottom line. Led me, I guess, to another step in my in my tour of the world. My next move was to Newcrest Mining in Melbourne, Australia, and I ended up in Melbourne because I had former colleagues from ExxonMobil there. They introduced me to some recruiters, and ultimately I was introduced to a guy named Greg Robinson, who was former BHP oil, and kind of knew what my previous development meant. and gave me a role really with commercial responsibility for mining and exploration assets in Western Australia, Indonesia, and PNG. Similar to ExxonMobil, the company took the time to rotate me through a wide range of roles. I was the commercial GM. I ran business planning, investor relations, business development, and projects and studies. So using both engineering and I guess the commercial and business qualifications. I did Newcrest for about 11 or 12 years, so quite a long time in the way that my career had worked before that. But I was enticed into the junior world by a former colleague who had become the chair of this company called Xanadu Mines. And he said, "We've got a project that looks just like Cadia Valley, and I need someone that knows what that means and can help me move this, towards out of exploration and towards commercialization." So it was an interesting opportunity for someone like me who could wear multiple hats. They needed a CFO, they needed a development officer, they needed someone who could run the corporate, but also run a truly large development project, who knew hard rock mining, copper, and gold. So it was a perfect fit. Um, I was brought in to expand that executive skill set, leverage the network, and try to commercialize this flagship project. And that's really where we are today, Rob.
Yeah. Your background's interesting. You've obviously been in the oil and gas and aerospace industry.
Yeah.
And I was probably about a year ago talking to a senior person at BHP and we were talking about obviously the skill shortages within our industry.
Yeah.
And she mentioned about attracting people from other industries, and she did mention aerospace is an industry that BHP were already looking at, or they were intending to move forward with, and look at people from the aerospace industry, engineers, to then maybe approach them to come over to the mining industry because they would have certain skills and experiences which can be quite easily transferred into the mining industry with obviously a few years maybe of learning and education. I just wonder if you can comment on that because you have come from that industry and obviously the oil and gas industry as well. And I wondered how you found that particular transition from those different industries now and obviously then coming into the mining industry.
Uh, well, I guess my transition was into oil and gas, not into mining, but certainly when I look at what I was doing in aerospace, it was a very structured process. It was about not making a single mistake because you're only going to make one of these things. Um, and so and the engineering was a lot of kind of open your textbook and figure out how to do something. When you look at oil and gas, there's some of that. Um, I got involved in some really interesting projects with fuels marketing and automatic vehicle refueling and things like that really leveraged my aerospace experience. But I also got involved in some real kind of Six Sigma type work, where you're looking at taking something that you've done a million times and making it better and more efficient. And that was very different. So I think direct transferability of specific skills probably not super high, but the learning and the way of thinking is really what you're talking about. Can you think in a structured way? Can you hold on a conversation about engineering topics? I think it might have been easier for me, to be honest, going into oil and gas and then stepping into mining after that, because I had a kind of a two-stage process. Um, I think, when you're talking about BHP, they are a very systemized company. And I think that would also be very suited to aerospace because, again, aerospace is very systemized. Um, there's a lot of data and documentation around everything you're doing to make sure you're being consistent, doing it the proper way, and you understand all the bits and pieces around it. So there's sort of my thoughts. I think it is applicable. I think, but I'm of a view that an engineer in any industry can probably learn to adapt and work in another one.
Yeah, and I think that's what the industry does need because there is obviously a lack of mine engineers in our industry. So I think we need to
Mm.
tap into other industries and maybe poach those engineers out of those other industries into mining.
I think that's it. With with the right training programs, it's certainly, I think, a logical approach.
Yeah. So I wonder if you can obviously tell us a little bit about Xanadu, a little bit about the company and the history behind it.
Sure. Xanadu is an ASX and TSX, so dual listed exploration company. As you said, focused on copper and gold in Mongolia. We have three projects. We've got the Kharmagtai project, which is a big copper gold porphyry. That's our flagship at PFS stage, and then two earlier stage exploration projects called Red Mountain and Sant Tolgoi, all of which are in Mongolia. The company was listed in 2005 on the ASX as a coal explorer in Mongolia. There was a bit of a gold rush for coal in Mongolia at the time. Xanadu was unfortunately unsuccessful in finding a high value commercial coal asset. But years later, when Rio Tinto bought Ivanhoe Mongolia to get that Oyu Tolgoi project that everyone's heard about, all of the other exploration assets for Oyu Tolgoi ended up being sold off. And the Xanadu chief geo at the time was ex-Ivanhoe. He was a baby geo when they were doing that work, and he knew the portfolio. He helped the company acquire two exploration projects with a Mongolian partner in 2013 and 14, and really the company made a pivot from coal to copper and gold at the time. And one of those was that big project, Kharmagtai, that I talked about. It really drew on the old Ivanhoe network in country, used the existing data, and quickly put together a resource on this project in 2015 and 16. They were able to pull in some really good people in Mongolia and put together some very good good people in country that could support them both politically as well as operationally. So the market got excited. While this was an old project that Robert Friedland used to talk about, it had sort of been forgotten. Xanadu put out a resource and said, well, look at this. This is big and it's got lots of potential. The value really, the market cap really shot up on the project and on the company. And if you're a study of the Lassonde Curve, this is sort of the point that's that peak value of discovery when an explorer would hope to sell and move on as a hero and go do it again. The company then completed a secondary listing on TSX and was looking to do a deal, but for a number of reasons, the transaction was never completed. And so they moved into that stage of doing drilling to make it bigger and better. But Xanadu was a junior explorer. Porphyry assets are big and consistent, need a lot of money and time, and often don't make a lot of really exciting news flow. So the market got bored and the stock price fell to a very low level. By 2020, it got to a point where there had to be a change of board and management, both because shareholders were demanding it, but also because new skills were needed to move the project forward. And that's sort of where the new chairman and MD and I came in with that goal of commercializing Kharmagtai. Over the past 4 years, the company's made a lot of progress. It's updated the resource at Kharmagtai to show of a truly global scale. It's completed a concept study, attracted a funding partner, and produced a maiden ore reserve in PFS just last October, actually.
You mentioned obviously the Lassonde Curve, and obviously I'd imagine a lot of our audience will know or be aware of the Lassonde Curve.
Yep.
Just wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about that, and I suppose how it applies to the Xanadu story, and also I suppose more importantly, does it mean that the company's strategy is now to become a producer?
All right, I'll answer those two in order. I think the Lassonde Curve is named after Pierre Lassonde, a former president of Newmont and founder of Franco-Nevada. He really, I guess, raised the awareness of it. But what it does is it illustrates the typical life cycle of a junior mining company, generally a single asset company, showing its market capitalization over the different stages of development of that project. It really is an important tool for both investors and people that are executives in the junior world to understand the market they're operating in. Takes it and you think, oh, it's just a curve, it's just theoretical, but you can map so many companies and progress against it, including Xanadu. And one of the things that really takes into account is the fact that the junior market capitalization is not a pure valuation of future cash flows. It's driven by speculation, it's driven by market sentiment, often the last trade on a low volume day. And so the story you're telling has a huge impact on where your market capitalization goes. So, usually you draw it, but obviously we're having a verbal conversation here. So to try to describe it, you've got a y-axis that's market capitalization and an x-axis which shows your stage of development or time. The market cap starts low during the exploration stage, but after a discovery, it rapidly increases based on speculation for what it could be. You have investors in there who are high risk, high reward, and that's really the target point where explorers, early stage investors are hoping to sell the project, go back to what they know best, and move it on to somebody who's going to take it forward into production. Xanadu really reached that point in 2017. They put that new resource out using those old Ivanhoe data and a little bit of new drilling, and said, well, this could be the next Oyu Tolgoi. And after that initial peak, so that's the Xanadu dot point on that curve. The next point on the curve, after you've got this peak where the market value shot way up, it drops right back down again because it's time for resource drilling, which doesn't deliver the exciting news flow. It's boring to a high risk, high reward market cap or market kind of investors. And so the speculators are leaving. There's more data. You don't know. It couldn't be anything anymore. You start knowing what it is. And it leads to a trough in share price that we colloquially, I don't even know if I'm saying that word right, call it the valley of death. And once you pass that point, you can't go back. It takes a different skill set to move forward. So, the next steps are to de-risk the project through scoping, pre-feasibility, and feasibility. And that's where Xanadu found itself in 2019. Stock price was cratered and unfamiliar work was ahead of it. Back to the Lassonde Curve as you move forward, the project has now gone through a peak, it's gone through a trough, and it starts a slow climb again, but not as steep as before. You're de-risking the project, you're doing studies, the market interest slowly rekindles, and you start to regain market value with a different set of investors. However, to recover that original peak value, you've got to spend a lot more money, you've got to do a lot more work, and you need different skill sets. Significantly more money and work that went into that early discovery when you were maybe a team of exploration geos, rolling out your swags and doing quick work somewhere. And in 2019 to 20, that's when the company, again, Xanadu, found itself. It changed a number of board members, the chair, the MD, executive management, to bring in new skills. And now looking to 2025, Xanadu has been following that track, doing that hard work, and approaching the old peak market cap. So to finish the Lassonde Curve, it does continue past that point, past where we are now. It continues going up very slowly and eventually reaches a peak point, which is right after construction and startup. And that's where your market capitalization, if you've made it that far, still in control of your project, is at its peak. But of course, construction requires yet another order of magnitude of effort, cost, and yet another different set of skills than the people who are running the last set.
Obviously, Xanadu's flagship project, as you've been speaking about, Kharmagtai, is obviously at the PFS stage. Just wondering if you can just describe a little bit in more detail about some of the challenges and opportunities that the company is facing.
Sure. Look, Kharmagtai is a big low-grade copper gold porphyry. Its economics work on scale, low strip ratio, and byproduct credits, and it pays back its capital because it has higher grade zones within that big distributed porphyry system. It's located in the South Gobi region of Mongolia, about 120 kilometers from Rio Tinto's Oyu Tolgoi copper mine. It does have a very large resource, 2.2 billion tons, 4.7 million tons of copper and 11 million ounces of gold, but it's low grade, averaging 0.21% copper and 0.17 grams a ton of gold. There was a time when you'd say, well, you can't develop a project of that low grade, but that time is well past. You can point to several mines that are making really good money, Katy Valley being one of them, which we know well. Per the PFS design, the project will produce 75,000 tons per annum of copper and 165,000 ounces of gold a year for 29 years on average. It's got strong economics, 21% IRR, 4-year payback, about a 900 million NPV for the same initial investment. But so that's sort of the state of where it sits. When you look at challenges for big projects like this, they tend to include funding as your first question, especially if they're in the hands of a junior. Um, they're big scale. There's a lot of permitting. There's a lot of additional work to really get it to what you'd call an international feasibility standard. And ultimately, you need to find that high grade core that I talked about, so you don't have to start up at full scale. You can minimize your negative cash flow and really sneak up on it. That's really the way we looked at it when I was at Newcrest and we were looking at new projects. Kharmagtai has those same characteristics, which the MD told me when he first told me that I should come and join him. There are still some significant opportunities at Kharmagtai. The top 20 meters of the deposit's weathered. It won't float, but the grade is there, and we think it could be captured through a sequential heap leach. There's more work to be done on that. There's that'll turn pre-strip into cash, which is cash flow up front always. If you're doing an economic analysis, is the best. There's silver in the deposit, but not sufficiently assayed to include in the resource yet. So we've got some drill core that we need to assay. That'll come for free in the concentrate, so we need to quantify it. And we also believe there's opportunities to improve recovery and increase the pit slope, or steepen the pit slopes. All those opportunities will be run through to the ground in the bankable feasibility study that's to come. And importantly, this project remains open at depth and along strike. So there's real potential for growth and longer term potentially for a block cave underground mine. We like to draw the comparison to Oyu Tolgoi. You wouldn't be surprised by that down the road. The initial project there was an open pit mine that looked very similar to Kharmagtai. It didn't transform until what it is today, until a very deep drill hole was pushed down and tagged the top of Hugo Dummett, and that's what's going to make it the fourth largest copper mine in the world. It transformed Oyu Tolgoi, transformed Ivanhoe. Obviously, was very transformative to Rio Tinto as well. And at Kharmagtai, there's been very little drilling at depth below around 800 meters, which is where Hugo Dummett starts.
I suppose at the moment there are a lot of obviously big companies chasing copper. So why is Zhejiang the right partner to help obviously Xanadu take the project forward? You've got obviously completed the PFS together. How have obviously the different cultures come together, and I suppose what challenges have you faced?
Well, Zhejiang's a top 5 copper miner, and I believe also top 5 gold miner globally. So they're certainly of scale. They operate in 15 countries and have had to develop, I guess, a more nuanced and advanced international approach to how they do business versus perhaps what some people say about Chinese companies, out in the market. And they have a very aggressive growth model. And importantly, they're really experienced at building value through advanced metallurgy. We got to tour their Zhejiang site in China, translated, I believe, to Gold Mountain, and they were doing some really interesting leaching and work to get value out of what was really an old asset. So in addition to the kind of scale, capability, motivation, logistically, they or someone like them is the right partner just across the border to the south. And we know that China is aggressively chasing resources in jurisdictions where they're welcome. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Mongolia's historical partnership with them kind of has started to fade a bit, and it's created a moment where the Chinese investment is more welcome. You may know, that there's a bit of shared history between Mongolia and China, and the common person maybe doesn't appreciate each other as much as they should, and that's really been a big change for them. And we believe that also was a driver for Zhejiang really showing its interest in us. From the Xanadu perspective, one of the challenges we faced as a junior with a big project like Kharmagtai was answering investor questions about how do you fund it. Our 3-pronged strategy in 2020 was we wanted to show that what the resource could be, show what the project could be, and find a credible funding partner. And Zhejiang came in after that scoping study was published in 2022. We did have a lot of interest from international mining companies that weren't Zhejiang, but they were the most aggressive, and they did the best deal. They offered the best deal to us. And with that global major on board, the question of funding has largely been answered. Maybe not whether Xanadu will be the funding, but the question of whether the project will be funded is now clear. From a cultural perspective, there's some obvious differences between an Australian, Canadian, and Chinese mining companies and people. But as I said before, Zhejiang isn't just a pure Chinese operator. They're in 15 countries. They've learned to work under different rules and cultures. And in terms of aligning between the two, Zhejiang highly values technical and engineering capability, and they want to see the project go ahead, which is the same as us. And when your goals are aligned, you can find ways to work together, even if you don't always mean the same thing when you use the same words.
Why has Xanadu decided to focus on copper and gold compared to other commodities? What's so special about copper and gold to Xanadu?
Well, the original pivot was opportunistic, moving out of coal into copper and gold. Um, but the chairman and I are former Newcrest and very much followers of copper and gold as assets to be held together. We like that natural hedge between copper and gold and the long-term value proposition that hedge creates. We used to talk about, and I still like to talk about the copper gold hedge as a four season cycle. You have autumn, when there's low economic activity and high political stability. That's the rare scenario, and both copper and gold are down. But then you have winter, low economic activity and lower political stability. Copper stays down, but gold starts to rise with that lower political stability. In spring, economic activity comes up, political stability stays low, and copper and gold are both high. In summer, you got high economic activity, maybe politics is getting more stable, copper stays high and gold starts to go down. So, in two of those seasons, you've got a natural hedge. In one of the seasons, copper and gold are both up, and one of them they're both down. So, 1 out of 4, and we would argue that that's the least, or the world spends the least amount of time in that space. Similar to the Lassonde Curve, it's really just a useful tool to look at a company that does copper and gold and plan your activity really to match it.
Outside of obviously Rio Tinto's Oyu project, Mongolia's not I suppose not a well-known jurisdiction. What can you tell us about working and getting things done in Mongolia? And I suppose what would you say is the outlook for the mining industry in Mongolia?
Well, it's true that Mongolia is not as well known as other mining provinces, but the diaspora, ex-Rio Tinto and Oyu Tolgoi consultants is starting to expand across the industry now. You're starting to be able to find people that have at least made a touch on it. We love Mongolia. We've been there since 2005, as I said, and we kind of like to quote 5 reasons that we think Mongolia is great. It's perspective. It has the right kind of rocks. And 50 years ago, it was behind the Iron Curtain, so it doesn't have a long history of modern exploration. It's one of those places you could still potentially kick an outcropping ore body instead of having to go deep undercover. The second is developability, if that's a word. Mongolia has a highly educated workforce, stable, democratic, low ESG barriers because there's very low population density. It's got a mining culture. It's got good infrastructure in the South Gobi that the government is continuing to improve. And in fact, to tell a story about that, we went to a site pre-COVID and everything was pretty quiet and empty. We came back when we were allowed to go back to the country again, and there was a big industrial railway that had been built right across the South Gobi with multiple connections down into China. It was just there. And there was a train station that was named after our project that was built with a siding near us. A subtle hint from the government, perhaps. Third reason is mining culture, right? Stable, democratic. Mining's 90% of Mongolia's exports, so they're incentivized to support it. It's got that location right on the doorstep of China, and finally, we do have that local expertise and air cover. So we love Mongolia's geology, its people, and the opportunities. When you ask about the future of Mongolia, one thing Mongolia is, as I said before, it's a young democracy, and it's got a young regulatory regime as a result of that, mostly based on old Russian rules, and that's challenging to some to operate in if you don't know the right way to navigate it. And the government's really working hard to try to fix that. Some of the challenges in that are well understood, and they've learned a lot from their relationship with Rio Tinto and the development of Oyu Tolgoi. So I think the future is bright for Mongolia, and it's one of those places you have to go.
And lastly, what's the outlook for Xanadu over the sort of next 6 to 12 months? And is there anything objectives that you may want to achieve during that time?
Look, Xanadu is a small explorer with a very big, compelling project that majors are chasing. Our key focus is really bringing that to a conclusion and developing value for our shareholders. I think I forgot to answer your question earlier when you asked about, do you want to become a producer? I think the answer is we don't. At our heart, we're an exploration company. We don't have the personnel or the scale or the systems to become a producer. But we will stay in this project as long as necessary to generate the right value for our shareholders. So the next step for Kharmagtai itself is a bankable feasibility study and really to move through the Mongolian permitting process. Zhejiang's now the operator, and decision making is under a 50-50 joint venture. The next step for Xanadu is funding for that bankable feasibility study, and ultimately, how do we participate in the construction of Mongolia's next big copper mine? But that funding, and I'm using the word funding loosely, could take a few different forms. We could be self-funding that project. We could move into a whole or partial asset sale for our share. There could be a corporate deal, and we also have some put options at our election with Zhejiang that could see them fund our share for us giving them a portion of that in control. And we're working hard on all those pathways simultaneously. So what's next is in many ways diverges into many different paths that we need to progress simultaneously. The self-funding could be a mix of debt, equity, or offtake. We're working with our advisors through term sheets to put that together. There's different parties in the data room, and we're talking to Zhejiang about next steps as well. So in parallel with all that, because it's easy to just get focused on the flagship project, the Xanadu exploration team is making plans for the next stage of work. And our other two projects, the ones that we directly control without a JV partner, or I guess one of them entirely and the other with an earn-in. The Sant Tolgoi project, magmatic copper-nickel system, we completed geophysics and geochem and mapping last year, and we have 4 drill targets that we're going to aim for this year. That's an earn-in with a Mongolian partner. We're going to progress to 51% this year. And then Red Mountain, the second former Ivanhoe project that we picked up. It's one of those places with very complex geology, 1,000-year-old workings on site from previous gold mining. We bought out our Mongolian partner there in 2021 and progressed our most recent drill program last year. And we're putting mining shapes around that now to put together an exploration target, and then we'll move into the 2025 program later this year.
Great. Spencer, thank you for giving us an overview in the history and what Xanadu are up to. Obviously, telling us a little bit about Mongolia, the mining industry there, and also educating us around the Lassonde Curve as well, which I suppose isn't necessarily taught as much as possibly it should be. So wish you well for the remainder of the year. And maybe you want to come on the podcast next year to give us an update on how 2025 went.
That'd be great, Rob. I hope I have some really interesting news to share then.
Yeah, great. And if our audience wants to follow the story, how can they go about doing that, and what social media platform channels are you on?
Look, there's a lot of ways to do that. We're on Twitter, we're on LinkedIn. You can sign up to our on our website to get all of our announcements pushed out to you. And of course, you can follow us on ASX and TSX.
Yeah, all those will be included in the show notes accompanying this podcast. So thank you for your time, Spencer, and all the best for 2025.
Thanks, Rob. It's been a pleasure.
Great. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed that episode. We probably haven't had too many podcasts on Mongolia, so appreciate if you can share this episode, obviously far and wide, with people, as I always say, not just people within our industry, but people outside of the mining industry also. Apart from the podcast, you can obviously also listen to this on our YouTube channel as well. So thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed the episode. And until next time, happy mining.
Thank you for listening. Remember to reach out to Rob via the show notes, and be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Until next time, happy mining, helping each other to improve the mining industry.